right, welcome to the campaign, or rather welcome to the prologue episode for my County of Sylvania Warhammer 3 campaign. And yes, I know, it's actually it's called Vlad von Karstein, but I prefer my faction names to be more like the names of like people or countries or things like that. So I know I'm calling it the County of Sylvania, but I'm aware that it's actually just Vlad von Karstein's faction. But anyway, welcome to the prologue. And just as, in case you've never seen one of my prologue episodes before, basically we're just going to talk a bit about the campaign, how I conduct battles, how the recordings work, you know, just a bunch of different, let's call them background details, or maybe technical details for how the campaign is run. If you don't care to hear any of that, again, that's all this episode is going to be about. So, you know, feel free to just skip this one and go right to episode 1. We'll get right into the battles and the campaign in that episode. And it's already out, so you can just go right from this video to that video. Now, if you're sticking around, I assume you want to hear what I have to say on the, again, those background / technical details of the campaign. So first off, if you've seen any of my past campaigns, then a lot of this will be very familiar to you. My campaigns are very, very battle-focused. I spend minimum time on the campaign map, basically explaining where I am, what I'm about to do, maybe some things that have happened since you guys were last with me in the video. Basically, I skip over a lot of the campaign stuff and focus very heavily on the battles. I'm still giving you guys the context to know like why the battle is happening, like where we've been, what we've been doing. But don't expect me to spend too much time on the campaign map, basically. Something that I also need to mention, because I've only actually done it in one campaign now, is replays. Because in Rome 1 and Medieval 2, there were no campaign battle replays, and so I would just show you guys the battle as I fought it. But in my last campaign, the Empire Total War campaign as the United States, basically, I think it's from Empire Total War onwards, you have the ability to save battle replays of your campaign battles. And so instead of showing you guys the battle as it occurred, I show you guys the replay instead, just so that I can, you know, I guess it helps, I think, for just the cinematic nature of the video to have, be able to like dive my camera in to watch the fighting and to focus on giving commentary while not having my attention divided by actually having to fight the battle. I just think it's more interesting that way. Also gets you like better visuals because you can, again, move the camera around, not having to care about like directing the troops because, you know, the battle's already occurred and we're now just watching the replay. So expect that when it comes time for a battle. Just some further rules that are very personal rules for me, obviously. I don't do any auto-resolves, for example. Now, this doesn't mean that you guys are going to see literally every single battle. If it is just like a small, quick battle, and, you know, I don't think it's very important for the campaign, well, then you guys won't see it. I'll just mention that it occurred the next time I bring you guys back to join me again in a video. I'm not sure how often that would really happen, because it's like, to define what I consider an important battle, any battle that, first off, contributes to the victory conditions. So, taking a settlement, for example, I'm pretty sure the victory conditions for Warhammer 3 still include actually like conquering provinces, as in older games. And so any settlement battle would contribute to the victory conditions, and so I would show you all of them even if they were rather small. Now, if the battle is very small, it also shouldn't take very long, but again, kind of, I'll play it by ear, especially with a game I'm so unfamiliar with. And we'll talk about that in a bit, too, about just how unfamiliar I am with the Warhammer Total War games, or just the later Total War games in general. But yes, there'll be no auto-resolves. Every battle that I think is important enough, whether it contributes to the victory conditions, or even if it's just like a really large, spectacular battle, even if it doesn't directly contribute to like the victory conditions, we'll be seeing all of those. But not necessarily every battle either. Another thing I do is I always fight battles always to the end. So you know how once you've routed the enemy army, you'll get a little pop-up that asks if you want to continue the battle or end the battle. I think there's some equivalent to that in this game. I don't think it's actually a pop-up. I think it's a little drop-down that comes from the top there, but it's the same idea. And I always just automatically continue the battle, even if I don't need to. Like if I don't need to run down the enemy, for example. And that's just a personal preference of mine. I basically consider the chasing of the enemy, the running down of the enemy, to be as much a part of the battle as any other part of it, the fight with the enemy itself. I just consider that, in my mind, to be part of the battle, and just as enjoyable, except you have a different goal now. It's not to win the battle, it's to cut down as many of the enemy as possible. Again, whether or not you need to, maybe the enemy army would already be destroyed on the campaign map if you didn't chase them down. But I like doing it. I love doing it, so I'm going to do it anyways. Now, if the chasing down of the enemy might get kind of tedious and boring or anything, I might let you guys go while I continue to do it off camera, but just know that battles are fought to the bitter end, if you will. Another thing that I believe exists in the Warhammer games, and I keep saying the Warhammer games, I should really probably say more the later Total War games in general, even though I've hardly played any of them. But I believe it's like this in most of them, where instead of having, as in Rome 1 and in Medieval 2, this like center of the settlement, which is basically the only control point, I believe there's many throughout a settlement. I think I saw that in my multiplayer campaign. I don't know exactly how that works. I think they do contribute to like victory. Like if you take enough of them, the enemy army will rout or something. But I think you need to take, first off, a bunch of them. And so I'm basically just going to try and avoid that. Basically taking, I guess, a critical mass of them to rout the enemy army without actually having to fight them or having to fight them as much. And it's kind of the same deal as in my previous campaigns, where I consider like using these, control points, or in the previous campaigns it would have been just the center of the settlement, to win. I always am annoyed by that because the enemy then just kind of loses, either because they run away or the battle just ends, whatever. And I think battles, again, should be fought to the end. So as long as there's enemy units, ready and able to fight, you should have to fight them. Or at least that's how I feel. I want to fight them. Even if that means taking extra casualties, or maybe even potentially, I don't know if I could really lose the battle at that point, but I guess there's maybe potential for that. But anyway, no quote-unquote magic victories. Basically, the battles have to be fought to the end against any units that are still able to fight back. And of course, running down the survivors even after the battle is won. So the faction I'll be playing as is Vlad von Carstein's, which I'm going to be referring to as the County of Sylvania. And again, a lot of this is just my personal preference. Like, nobody cares. I know, it's just a me thing. I understand. But I care, and I care. So anyway, I don't know much about Warhammer lore, so I know that the province he starts in is Sylvania. And I was just like looking through like Warhammer articles to try and understand like a bit of the history, and I saw that at least at one point it was referred to as the County of Sylvania. And so I thought, well, there we go. That's what I'm going to basically refer to the faction as. I'm going to call it the County of Sylvania. And yes, Vlad von Carstein will be our faction leader, or legendary lord, I think they're referred to in this game. Despite being a Total War channel, you might think I've played a lot of the Total War games, if not all of them, and you might be surprised to hear that I've played very few of them. I played Rome 1 and Medieval 2 quite a lot when I was a much younger person, and basically those are the only two games that I've played a lot of. When it comes to, I guess, Warhammer specifically, and I guess we should focus on that, I've never played Warhammer 1. I've played a single campaign in Warhammer 2 as Sylvania, though I think, what's his name? I think it's Manfred. I think he's still a von Carstein. Yeah, I think it's Manfred von Carstein, or at least Manfred. Maybe that's not his last name, but Manfred at least was the faction leader at that time. But basically, I played a campaign as him, so as the vampire counts in Sylvania. Don't go looking for that, though. That was before I even started this YouTube channel, so it was quite a while ago, and it was in Warhammer 2. I also did, like, half of a campaign as the Dark Elves, specifically, what's his name? Darth Vader? Malekith? Yes, Malekith is his name. Half a campaign, because the game was still being updated at that point, and they made some changes to like public order and stuff, and honestly I wasn't having fun at that point, so I just kind of stopped halfway through the campaign, which is rather unusual for me. But again, all before I did YouTube, so there are no Warhammer 2 campaigns here on the channel. Now with Warhammer 3 specifically, the only real experience I have is the multiplayer campaign or the third of a multiplayer campaign that I did with Slayer. If you watch my multiplayer channel, Slayer is basically one of my squad from over there, and he played basically a Warhammer 3 campaign with me. Well, again, like a third of it. It's incomplete. I've got it actually marked as incomplete here on the channel. And I mean, you can go watch it, but it's going to be very different from my other campaigns. Like all the rules I just explained about it being battle-focused and using replays and fighting battles to the end, like basically that all went out the window because I didn't want to impose my rules upon Slayer or anything. So I guess watch it if you want. Again, the campaign was never finished, and it's very different from my others, so I guess it's up to you. And that's it. That's my only Warhammer 3 experience. So taking this all together, basically no experience in Warhammer 1, a campaign and a third maybe in Warhammer 2, and maybe a third of a campaign in Warhammer 3. So I'm not exactly the best Warhammer Total War player, or most experienced, I should say, Warhammer Total War player. So I guess keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind, because some mechanics and things might escape me. Like I may have forgotten about something, I may not understand something, and I have tried to do a bit of research to not be just a complete idiot in the campaign, but expect some degree of idiocy on my part. Especially since I perhaps also mention, like I'm talking about like recent Total War games. Basically, I haven't played any of the Total War games from, let's see, Napoleon Total War onwards, with the exception of those Warhammer campaigns that I just mentioned. So no Shogun 2, no I already mentioned Warhammer, no Rome 2, Attila, no, what are the other ones? Thrones of Britannia, Troy, Three Kingdoms, Pharaoh, I think that's all of them. I haven't played any of those. So even like whatever extra knowledge, like whatever similarities there might be between those that might, you know, help someone who's learning Warhammer Total War, I don't know those games either. Basically, it's just those past campaigns. That's my full experience there. So again, I don't think I'll be a complete idiot, but expect some degree of idiocy on my part. All right, so last thing to talk about is just quickly the mods we'll be playing with. I have to admit, I think I went just a tad overboard. Just a tad, looking at the list here. Because in the past, when I do quote-unquote Vanilla Plus campaigns, where it's basically the Vanilla campaign, but with just a little extra, basically, it's only graphical updates or maybe bug fixes, or more likely both. I don't try to change the gameplay beyond bug fixes, basically. Now, if I have the mod list here in front of me, and you can, if you go into the description of my videos, there'll be like a Steam list for all of the mods that I'm using if you want to take a look yourself. I mean, many of them are just graphical changes, bug fixes, but there are a few that definitely aren't. I'm not going to go through like the whole list right now or anything. Even in a prologue video, that would probably be rather boring, but like there's at least a couple of mods that add extra landmark buildings, for example, that I assume give like, well, not assume, they give extra effects and stuff. I also assume they're just probably from the lore. There's like a mod that adds like a few extra units to each faction. I think it's called the Expanded Roster compilation. So there are definitely mods in here that change gameplay. I don't think it's too big of a change, but at the same time, I do think it goes beyond what I normally accept in a Vanilla Plus campaign. And again, you can look at the list yourself. I don't think it's too drastic, but it's definitely more than normal. And so I just wanted to point that out, especially for any returning viewers. And yes, I guess I did forget to mention that My choice of faction is very specific, though you may have already picked up on why I chose this faction, because it's the only one that I've done in Warhammer 2. So moving over to Warhammer 3, I wanted a faction that I was at least somewhat familiar with, because I don't think there's any DLCs that specifically like targeted Vlad von Karstein's faction in any way, like giving him extra abilities or units or anything. So I think the only real difference, I guess, between Warhammer 2 vampire counts, or at least the Sylvania faction specifically, and Warhammer 3 is the faction leader, because again, it used to be Manfred and now it's Vlad. Though I'm actually a little familiar with Vlad, because in my Warhammer 2 campaign, I did manage to confederate him, and actually use him for a fair bit of the campaign. So I'm not like totally unfamiliar with all of this, but also not extremely familiar either. But yeah, I think having a faction that I'm familiar with will help ease me into Warhammer 3 a bit, and make that the idiocy less common, which is kind of my goal in a lot of this, is just to make the campaign enjoyable for me to play and for you guys to watch without just being a complete nincompoop about everything. All right, and so I guess that's more or less it. I guess just the last thing to talk about would very quickly just be the schedule. Because normally the way I do this is I start 2 campaigns at a time. One of them will finish before the other, so I then just do 2 episodes of the campaign that isn't finished yet until it's done. And then once they're both done, I start 2 new campaigns. But as I explained in my epilogue episode for my Empire Total War campaign, I basically, I'm just not even close to being done with my Divide and Conquer campaign. And so I thought, you know what, let's try and squeeze in another campaign here. We shouldn't have any issues with that. I do want to try and get into like other Total War games as well. That was actually partially why I did Empire, despite having very little previous experience with that game as well. And so now I'm jumping admittedly quite far ahead here, going all the way past all those other Total War games to Warhammer 3. But ironically, it's because, despite having not much experience with Warhammer Total War, or the Warhammer Total War games, it's technically more experience than I have with basically any of the others, because again, haven't played Napoleon, Shogun, Rome 2, etc. And I do want to get to those, but I thought I'd start with the one that I have at least a bit of experience in first, and then work my way to some of these other ones as well. So anyway, that is actually it. As I already mentioned earlier, episode 1 is already out, and we should have a new episode basically every Friday. And we also have, of course, the Divide and Conquer episodes on Monday, and then we have the Battles episodes on Wednesday, which is where basically I take a single battle from a already completed campaign and basically make it into its own video, like just a short video where it's just like one battle. And so I think the plan is we'll just basically continue to run with this, run both of the campaigns at the same time, kind of like we normally do, and then once this campaign is over, the County of Sylvania campaign, I assume the Divide and Conquer campaign will be enough along that we can go back to our normal procedures of doing 2 episodes of that until it's done. But depending on how long this campaign takes, maybe we won't. Maybe we'll try and do a 3rd campaign alongside that Divide and Conquer one, because it does seem like it's going to take a while. But anyway, regardless of what happens, I think that's it. So I will let you guys go now. Episode 1 is already out, and I hope to see you there.